Well, we'll start where
With family.
So Maureen takes the sideline.
still not
I
great.
worry about him out there.
We're talking about a guy named Roy who's 96 and is setting a world record, running 3 miles for somebody who's in their 90s.
Pick it up again.
Roy does that for 5 kilometers, 3.1 miles.
Way to go, Roy.
The minutes count up and so do the steps. Until the final sprint down the home stretch. 42 minutes, 30 seconds is Roy's time. A new world record in the 95 to 99 age group by nearly 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's a great feeling when you win a race, and especially to set a record. That gives you a great feeling.
A world record is a remarkable feat for any 96-year-old. But what's next? Well, Roy says that the plan now is the same as it's always been. Put one foot in front of the other.
I'll keep going as long as I can. That's all I can say. You know, at my age, it's one day at a time.
He'll say the secret of life, for him at least, is to keep moving. And that's why he projects on all of his friends.
As for his record,
Records are made to be broken. They'll all be broken sooner or later. Who knows how long? Somebody come along next year. But it doesn't matter. As long as you got the record, you know, it's okay.
How come we don't have that classroom?
Roy Engler runs
All right.
just like the rest of us.
I just keep going.
1 foot.
All right, let's see how I can, there we go. Back on track. Okay, now we all can't be Roy and break running records when we're in our 90s. But Roy is an example of resilience. Okay, like you said, 1 foot in front of the other. He's got small goals. You add up small goals and they can end up with big wins. Roy's not the only one who shows physical resilience. So we've got Mira, I'm not sure how to say the first name, 80 years old, summited Mount Everest. Gordie Howe played professional hockey at 52. That's even better than Tom Brady. Right? So there's physical resilience. And again, not everybody has that, but and we all aren't going to be able to run like Roy did in his 90s, but it's important to understand that we can set goals and we can meet them. All right, so now we're going to move on to cognitive changes associated with aging. Now, first, we're all aware of the struggles cognitively that are associated with aging. I'm going to go over those, but then I'm going to talk about some of the things we don't realize, that these struggles aren't as serious as we might think. Okay, well, one thing we do know is that most cognitive and motor skills do peak around the 40s and then they start to decline. And so, you know, here's a picture of cognitive skills. And these are skills that are mostly measured using the IQ tests. And yeah, okay, they do tend to peak actually, but like, you know, around the 40s or the 50s. And then there's a slower decline. And the declines generally don't start till mid 60s.
Can we get the whole screen?
Most of these declines.
You tell me.
Is that we're getting that from? Are you hearing that? Yes. Okay, good. All right. Okay. Most of these declines are due to slowing in processing, not in the inability to process. So a lot of these IQ tests, when they measure ability, they are measuring speed, processing speed. And the faster somebody processes, the better they do on those IQ tests and on those subtests. So as we all probably have noticed with aging, there's just a slower processing time. It's not that we can't do it, right? It's not that the memories aren't there or the processing isn't there. It just takes a little longer.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, do we know what this is? Is this somebody on Zoom hasn't muted?
What?
To go potty.
Let's have everybody on Zoom mute. Okay. So getting back to the topic at hand here, we, as we age, just need more time to process. We still have the abilities, we need more time to process. We also aren't able to process as much information at once as we used to. So we use paper and pencil. So we take notes. Okay, so we use things to help us. And we can't hold quite as much information in our memory again. So we use pencil and paper and we compensate for that. So when you think about the cognitive declines in aging, they're not as bad as you might think looking at this graph. Another thing about the graph is that it stops here and it makes it look like we decline down to all the way to the bottom. There's all sorts of space here that's not on the graph, so it makes it look worse than it is. And let's see, yeah, and as I said, most of these declines don't really start until after about 65. All right, now let's look at some of the strengths cognitively that are associated with aging. So now we're looking up here at verbal comprehension. And you notice there's actually very little change that occurs as we age. And in terms of verbal comprehension, that's understanding what we read and understanding what we hear. It's actually peaking in the late 60s. So there are some skills, and verbal comprehension, wouldn't you say that's a pretty important skill? Yeah, that's one of the skills that helps you get along in this world and get along with other people. And verbal comprehension continues to increase until the 70s. And then what we do is we go back to like the verbal comprehension of 20 and 30-year-olds. So it's, you know, so in terms of verbal comprehension, age can be a benefit. And age is even more so a benefit when we look at something called crystallized intelligence. So there's fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is the thing that is pretty much affected most by processing speed. So it's ability to do mental math, you know, visual spatial things mentally, whereas crystallized intelligence is knowledge from prior learning and past experiences, wisdom, okay, knowledge. And you see, crystallized intelligence continues to grow as we age. Some societies, not necessarily our society, but some societies really respect the knowledge and wisdom of people in their later years. And there's reason for that. It does continue to grow. And also, in terms of our cognitive abilities, we're all very lucky to have grown up in a pre-digital world. So yeah, we all recognize that, don't we? So they talk about generations, the younger generations now, as being digital natives. Their whole life, they've been with social media, with gaming, and they've never known a life without it. Whereas, you know, when I used to teach, I'd say, okay, back when I was in graduate school, I used a typewriter. Blew their minds that somebody was still alive that didn't use a computer in graduate school. But what has that done to these young people to have grown up in a digital world? Well, as older Americans, we have escaped some of these problems you find with digital natives. We are better able to maintain our attention compared to younger generations. And there's a great book called Stolen Focus that talks a lot about the effect of the digital world on young people. We are better at reflecting and being introspective than the younger generations. And we don't experience this constant need for stimulation. So I think people, the average amount of time they spend on a website as they go through these things is like a number of seconds. And so they're constantly needing stimulation, because that's what they're used to. Where us non-digital natives, we can sit down and read a book for a couple of hours and enjoy that and not feel antsy like we're not getting enough stimulation. Another aspect of cognitive ability is creativity. And creativity benefits from age as well. Here's some examples of people who did some of their best works later in life. So Monet, this very famous water lily series, he did in his 70s and 80s. You've all probably heard of Grandma Moses, which is again emphasizing her age here. And she only began painting in her 70s. and did this at 90, this painting at 88. Really never too late. If you always said, I wanted to take up that painting, never too late. You may not be Grandma Moses, but you might enjoy it and produce something meaningful. Authors also. I don't know how many of you read Angela's Ashes? Great book, absolutely great book. Frank McCourt wrote that, won a Pulitzer Prize. It was his first book. He wrote it when he was 60. Okay. Laura Ingalls Wilder, who did the whole Little House in the Wood, Prairie Woods, something like that. She did that whole series of books, and there's television shows based on that. Her first book was published at 65. And a Booker Prize Award winner, Penelope Fitzgerald, wrote her first book at 60. So creativity is something that can thrive in later life, even if you haven't done anything with it seriously prior to that point. Okay, so let's talk about how we can decrease some of the declines associated, cognitive declines associated with aging. Okay, one way is through exercise. Okay, how many of you knew that already? Okay, all right, I'm gonna show you the proof too, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that. So now I'm gonna start getting a little sciencey here, and I'm gonna talk about a type of study called a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis is kind of now one of the gold standards in research. And a meta-analysis is when a researcher will find all the studies related to the topic they're interested in and combine the data and analyze it as if it's one huge study. So you'll end up with thousands of subjects when you combine this data. So we're going to talk about a meta-analysis where they looked at 98 studies that looked at exercise in older Americans, because they wanted to find out, does exercise affect cognitive abilities? And if so, what kind of exercise and how long does a person have to exercise to get the benefit? So what they did is they looked for studies in which they had control groups. They looked for studies in which half the subjects engaged in an exercise program and half did not engage in an exercise program. You don't want to do a correlational study where you just look at amount of exercise and then cognitive skills, because a person's cognitive skills might influence whether they're exercising. So you don't know what caused what. So these were all controlled studies in which there was a control group, non-exercise group, and an exercise group. And they found, again, 98 studies. The results of this showed that those who were in the exercise group had higher scores in attention, processing speed, and executive functioning. And executive functioning is your ability to plan and carry out tasks. Okay. So, and these are some attention, processing speeds. These are some of the things that we see declines in as we age. So exercise can stop those declines. To be maximally effective, so they again looks at, okay, what kind of exercise does this and how long does a person have to do it? They found about an hour a week needs to be done, more the better, but to get the benefit, you need to at least do an hour a week. And the exercise must be done about 3 times a week. Cumulative hours. So it's not that you have to do an hour 3 times, is it has to average up to an hour, or I'm sorry, total up to an hour. Now, which types of exercise are helpful in stopping cognitive decline? 3 types: aerobic, and we're talking walking here, just enough to get your heart rate up. So you don't have to be like Roy and run 3 miles in record pace. No, you just have to walk. Strength training with light weights, okay, or light machines. And also mind-body exercises. And those are exercises like yoga, where there's some strength, there's some stretching, and then there's some the mind-body connection. So that's introspection and focusing on the body. So all 3 types of those exercises were related to increases in attention, processing speed, and executive functioning. So you don't have to do a lot, but you do have to do something in order to get the effects of exercise. Any questions so far? I'm going to stop at different points. Yes. Yeah. Yep. At a minimum. Mm-hmm. Before you get to see the effects. Yeah. You could do just one. You could just do walking. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great questions. Oh, so the questions were, do you have to do all of the different types of exercise? And the answer is no, you just need to do one. And what was your question? Yes, yes. So, and the reason why I repeated those questions is because the folks at home couldn't hear them. So I'll try to remember to do that first thing next time. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, you would like an example of mind and body. It would be a yoga class. Yep. And Pilates classes can be a little bit that way as well. Great. Any other questions? Yes. They did not look at, no. Now they may have controlled for some of that. But so when you do these meta-analysis, sometimes you add the data with controls in it, sometimes you don't. I don't recall whether they put those controls in, but they're taking data from other studies, so they didn't have a lot of control over it. Other questions? Okay. Now, how to reverse declines in cognitive ability. So that was one of the myths that, you know, once you've had some type of a loss, it doesn't come back. And again, we're going to talk about exercise, but this study I think is really exciting because it does show you don't just stop declines from happening, you can regain through exercise. So the research question is, can vigorous exercise in older adults reverse or stave off the effects of aging on the brain? In this study, they had 120 subjects. The average age was 65. 60 were assigned to stretching and toning. And so there were some light weights involved here. And we know from the last study that the light weights can, if you do it enough, they can stop some declines. But here they looked at stretching and toning, and they had to do light weights and bands 4 times a week versus moderate intensity exercise. And both of these were for a year. Moderate intensity was walking 40 minutes 4 times a week. That's a lot. They didn't start out with the 40 minutes though. Started out, I think it was 5 minutes, and each week they increased until they got up to the 40 minutes. So if you think 40 minutes, okay, didn't happen overnight. So it was a slow progression. All right, so these were the two groups. They both were getting some exercise, but one was getting more vigorous exercise. And what they were looking at is this area of the brain called the hippocampus. And raise your hand if you've heard of the hippocampus. Okay, what is it involved with then? Memory. Oh, I put on there. Yes, the hippocampus is critical for laying down memories. You may have heard about people who've had a certain form of brain damage and they can't learn anything new. That's because their hippocampus has been damaged. And with Alzheimer's, you find the hippocampus is something that one of the first areas of the brain that is damaged. And so people can't lay down new memories. They can retrieve old things, but not new things. All right. So the hippocampus is critical for memory. So what they did in this study at the onset and 1 year after, they measured the size of the hippocampus. They wanted to see, can exercise affect the size of this very important brain region in memory? Okay, so the results. Here are the slides showing the results. The exercise group, and this is the size of the hippocampus. And this is the left hippocampus. The exercise group started here. Same, they were in this exercise group and the toning group, started out similar. And the volume in the exercise group actually increased. And that's something called neurogenesis. It actually grew new neurons in this important area of the brain. And we see the same thing happen. And with the toning, there was a decrease, which you would expect over a year, there should be a decrease. We lose a little bit of our brain every year. So the right hippocampus, there already was a little difference, just random at the beginning. But again, we see the exercise group, the hippocampus got larger, the toning group, there was some decrease. Okay, so tone and strength, that group lost volume, the vigorous exercise group gained volume. So we can say that this pretty vigorous exercise, again, 40 minutes a day, several times a week, it can not only stop some of the negative effects of aging, it can reverse some. Okay, so I think that was a pretty exciting study. So now we're all motivated to get out and walk, and it was walking. Okay, and for people that have mobility issues, you can do some exercise machines with your arms that are going to get your heart rate up. So there are a variety of ways of doing that, or swimming. Okay, but so vigorous exercise, and again, that was for like 40 minutes, 4 times a week. Yes. It's a sustained 40 minutes, but you know, if you can't do sustained 40 minutes, then do it in 2 groups. Yes. Okay, any other questions about exercise? This effect on the brain? All right, now another way to decrease or slow loss in cognitive abilities is this enrichment. How many of you heard about like these brain exercises, you know, do crossword puzzles and you're going to stop that? Well, okay, there's some good news, but some moderating news as well. Yes, these type of exercises, these brain exercises will help you maintain, but it doesn't have a generalized ability to other things. It's just in the air of what you're doing. So if you do crossword puzzles and you keep doing crossword puzzles, you'll continue to be good at crossword puzzles, but it's not going to make you better at playing bridge. Okay. But and likewise, if you play bridge and keep doing it, you're going to maintain your ability to play bridge, but it's not going to make you better at crossword puzzles or chess. Okay. So yes, it's good to maintain and engage in these things that exercise your brain, but they don't generalize to other skills. So the takeaway message on this one in terms of, you know, cognitive enrichment is that use it or lose it. So if it's something that, you know, like if you like to read, keep reading. If you like to play bridge, keep playing bridge. Because if you stop, you're going to decline a little bit. If you keep it up, you're going to keep your skills up. Another way to help is like if you incorporate some of these skills that you want to maintain into your everyday life so that you keep doing them. And take on cognitively challenging tasks because you can grow and develop in those areas. Again, it's not going to generalize everywhere, but it'll generalize in that area. So some people like learning a language. Okay, so you can do that. You can maintain that, keep up with it. So yes, this cognitive enrichment, it's a good idea. It's not this huge answer, but it can enrich your life and it does help. Questions about that? Okay, and another way to decrease or slow down the loss of cognitive abilities is through social engagement. Okay. And, you know, think of that, social engagement is going to help you with cognitive skills. So social engagement can slow the decline in loss of memory, ability to maintain attention, executive function. And again, executive function is one's ability to plan and carry out activities. And some researchers have looked specifically at volunteering, which is one form of social engagement. And volunteering is associated with cognitive enrichment in that area in which you're volunteering in. And it activates areas of the brain associated with reasoning. Okay, and again, when things are activated, you maintain those skills. So social engagement is also critical in maintaining cognitive abilities. This is why I think communities where, like, like Warm Friend, Freedom Village, they encourage this type of social engagement. Maintaining or living in a neighborhood you lived in many years, maintaining relationships with those friends. These are all really important things we need to do. Social isolation is very difficult for people as they age, emotionally and cognitively. Questions about this? HASP is another good example of social engagement and cognitive enrichment too. Gets people thinking. I was told before I came to speak here that people like to take notes. The more information, the better. Okay, and that's exactly what you should be doing, exercising those reasoning skills. Okay, and we haven't talked about dementia yet. Dementia is not the same as aging. So, and that's a myth that some people think that, dementia is a normal part of aging. It is not. Dementia is a disease state, very separate from aging. And a lot of things that we've been talking about are not true necessarily for dementia. So once dementia starts, it's hard, you really can't reverse it. But you can slow dementia through social engagement. So social engagement can reduce the risk of dementia. We don't know why that is. So we find lower levels of dementia among people who have children, and having children increases the amount of social engagement people have because they usually engage with the children. Not always, sometimes children are far away, but generally having children in your life helps you with social engagement. Being married or living with someone is another form of social engagement that is associated with a reduced risk of dementia. Having a greater number of social ties is also related to reduced risk of dementia. So again, social engagement is good for you cognitively, and we're going to talk a little later about the fact that it's good for you emotionally. Okay. If you know somebody who seems like they're getting socially isolated, reach out to them. If you're feeling isolated yourself, reach out to your friends. Make new friends. Okay, now we're going to move to new topic, struggles. And I thought I'd bring this up because age is associated with a lot of sleep difficulties. So raise your hand if you've had a change in sleep patterns as you've aged. Okay, yes. And you would be completely normal if you've had that. So I'm going to show you these two graphs here, and let's look at them for a minute. So what we have along this side here are your stages of sleep. Okay, that's along the left side. And it starts at the top with awake, and that's when you're alert. The next stage is REM sleep, rapid eye movement. That's where you're dreaming. And people think when they're dreaming that they're sleeping very deeply. Is that what you tend to think? But actually, you are just a hair away from being awake. So your mind's very active, and you could actually be woken up pretty easily. As you go into the later stages of sleep, that's where your deeper stages are. So there's stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 is the deepest stage of sleep. Now, the most important stages of sleep are REM sleep and stage 4. They are the most restorative. And REM sleep is where a lot of the memory consolidation occurs too. So REM sleep is important for memory. Okay, so now what we've got on the x-axis down here is how many hours, like this is hour after you went to to sleep, second hour, third hour, fourth hour. So these are, progression of sleep during the night. Okay, so let's look at these two graphs. The top one is the young adult. The bottom one is the elderly. Lots of differences between the two, right? What differences do we see? But okay, yeah. All right. It is very normal to cycle through all the stages when you sleep. So you generally go from awake. Many times we skip REM, you go down to deep, up, up. For the young person, they've got like maybe 5 of these a night. And like here's where you're waking up when you get all the way to top. So even young people will wake up in the middle of the night, but they generally go back to sleep so quickly, they're not aware that they were awake. But as we age, sleep gets fractured. And so we are cycling through very quickly and we're waking up a lot. Okay, good. What other differences do you see? Yeah, stage 4, the really restful sleep, sometimes it's just completely gone. So we're not getting the same kind of restorative deep sleep that we did when we were younger also. Okay, any other differences people see? Yes. These cycles happen much more quickly, many more of them. Okay, so I'm not showing you this to make you go, oh man. I'm showing you this for you to say, oh, okay, this is all right. This is normal. There's nothing wrong with me. These are changes that happen. And so we just need to say, okay, this is part of aging. This is one of the struggles of aging, right? But on the other hand, studies have also shown that as we age, we don't need quite as much sleep. So some people have in their head, I've got to get 8 hours. I have to have 8 hours. And so they try to force themselves into that 8-hour package. If you try to give yourself too much time to sleep, that's not healthy either, because then your sleep becomes very light and fitful. All right. So we need to recognize that, yeah, we're going to wake up at night. That's okay. That's normal. And that maybe we need a little less sleep. So don't try to force the 8 hours in there. It's okay if you sleep less. Now, one of the things I specialize in my practice is helping people with insomnia. And here are some of the things, and I have a very special program for it. But here are some of the things that you can do without going into therapy to help you sleep better and to sleep a little more restoratively. Okay. One is go to bed and get up at the same time. You want to train your body to go to sleep at a certain time and to wake up at a certain time. And so, even if you have a really late night, you should set your alarm the next day to get up at the time that you like to get up. I set my alarm for 6 every day, even on weekends, because it keeps me on a regular period. That doesn't sound good to you, does it? No, something like no, but it's important. And here's the one thing too. What do people do when they can't sleep at night? Like you wake up and you're in bed. Do you kind of, yeah, okay. Just get out of bed. Get out of bed and do something else. Okay, now why is that important? 2 reasons. One is if you lay in bed and roll around, you're conditioning frustration and being awake to being in bed. And you want the bed to be conditioned to sleep. The other thing is, as you're rolling around, you think you're not sleeping, but what's actually happening is you're getting little bits of sleep in there, but it's very light sleep. It's not restorative sleep. And that is draining your need to sleep the next night. So you're not going to have a lot of pressure to sleep the next night. So if you've been in bed for about 10, 15 minutes and you have that feeling like, I'm not going to go to sleep, then get out of bed and do something until you feel tired. And so what I recommend is, say, reading something that's maybe a little boring, because then you recognize when you're tired, because you start like, oh, I don't know what I just read. You recognize, oh, and then it's time to go back to sleep. Or maybe watch something on television so that you notice that you start to nod off. That's when it's time to go back to sleep. Okay. And so you may end up being out of bed for like 3-4 hours that night and say, well, I'm only going to get 3 hours of sleep. Get up at 6 o'clock, get up at that time, because then you're going to be really tired the next night and you're going to sleep better. Question. Oh, yeah. Computer screens are worse. Yeah, there's something. So melatonin is the natural hormone that you release that helps you fall asleep. And that melatonin is shut off by sunlight. And computer screens have that same kind of light that'll turn off melatonin. More so than television. Yeah, that was a really good point to bring up too, because yeah, don't get up and get on your screen. It's going to stimulate you too much. And also all that zipping back and forth. So don't do that. Do something less stimulating. Yes. Uh-huh. Oh, I had not heard that. Okay. Where did you see that? Okay. Okay. So I'll reflect on that. So you said that she heard on the CBS morning show that as long as you're getting between 4 and 10, you're okay. Yeah. And if you have more than 10, there's probably something else going on. But there's a caveat to that, I would say, is that the need for sleep is very individual. And you probably notice that yourself. Like, are there people here that have historically not needed a lot of sleep? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. And that's just your body. You just haven't needed a lot of sleep. So the whole idea 8 hours might make you anxious because I'm feeling great with 7. Okay. No, then that's all you need is 7. So some people might even be hard to think anybody could get by in less than 4, but and some people need 10 or 12. How many of you are like that where you really need a lot of sleep? Yeah. And that's completely normal for you. So everybody has to know what their own body needs. And it's a very individual thing. Yeah. Biphasal sleep. Yeah.
Sleep.
Okay. Yeah, I have heard, I haven't seen any research on that, but that would be okay as long as they don't, as long as they have a set bedtime and get up time. But if they're doing that and then they're getting back to bed at 4 in the morning and they're sleeping till 10, that can be really disruptive.
Okay.
But I'm kind of advocating a little bit for biphasal sleep if you've got some insomnia.
Well, I know that they found in writings like diaries and so on of past generations where people described that.
Yeah.
In fact, it tended to be the norm. And they wondered to what extent light pollution and all the other devices have changed what was a normal pattern of sleep, wake, and sleep to be sleep.
And I would think particularly in the summer, no, I'd say in the winter when it's dark for a long period of time and people don't sleep that long, right, in northern climates. So you might find that would have been a good way to adapt to that.
Okay.
Yeah. And you might find maybe it didn't happen in the summer, but yeah, we had only recently started studying sleep. So we don't really know what it'd be like in a world where we didn't have lights on and off, which have completely messed up our circadian rhythms. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I generally feel it's not a great idea to use some sleep aids. They create insomnia. So if you use a sleep aid, you will always have to use a sleep aid because your body will learn that's how you go to sleep. So that's one issue. But I have known people with really bad insomnia where they do that, and sometimes it's necessary. But I would try a sleep program before going on some type of medication. And I've worked with people who are on medication. And we do a sleep study before that, where a sleep diary, and we look at how much they sleep. They go off their medicine sleep gets worse, and then we do the sleep program, and it's gotten them right where they were with medicine. Yeah.
I might fall asleep on the couch and I know that I'm really tired.
Yeah.
By the time I walk to the bed,
Yeah.
I'm wide awake.
Yeah.
What's the deal with
Okay.
that?
It's, and it's it could be your physiology too. Like for me, if I'm woken up just as I'm drifting off to sleep, forget it, and you might be that way too. So the thing is, falling asleep on the couch, not a good idea. You don't mean to. Yeah. So the minute you feel yourself drifting off, get up and go to bed. Just the minute, be very hypersensitive to that. Okay. Another question?
Does a good restorative nap disrupt the sleep hygiene that you're talking about?
Next point.
Yeah, like the dog.
Yeah.
That's what made me think.
Yeah. You know what? I used to say don't do any naps, but then I've since read that short 15-minute naps are okay. Okay. So question? Oh. Short 15-minute naps are okay, but anything longer than that is going to completely disrupt your sleep and you're not going to sleep well the next night. So a couple of 15-minuters are okay to get you through the day.
We have some questions from
Okay.
the online audience. How common is REM sleep behavior disorder?
It's not very common at all. Okay. And that's where people will often act out their dreams. And that can be very dangerous. They'll punch their bed partners, or I've even heard stories of people jumping out of windows. So yeah, it can be a really problematic issue, but it's pretty rare. Okay. Okay. Another one. Okay. You probably already know this, but cool, dark, quiet bedroom. The cool is important too, because we don't fall asleep until our body temperature drops a little bit. If you're in a hot bedroom, it's not going to drop. So that's going to be a problem. Okay. Any other questions about sleep? Maybe I should do a whole thing on sleep. Yeah. Okay. Now let's talk about psychological health, mental health. And how that's affected by aging. And here's the good news. I love doing this part. Okay. So first of all, just talking about something called a personality disorder. Personality disorders, how many of you have heard of, well, we all know what narcissistic personality disorder is. How about borderline? Raise your hand if you're familiar with that. Borderline personality disorder is a person who doesn't get along well with others. They either love them or hate them. They turn on them. They create problems in communities. You've probably known folks like that. And then antisocial personality disorder is a disorder, what you might think of as being like a psychopath, but we call it antisocial in the field. All right. All of these disorders, people tend to outgrow as they age and outgrow. Now, some continue, like severe ones will continue throughout their lives, especially if they're indulged. Yeah. But they're probably indulged. Okay. But, what it is this is actually kind of like a delayed, immature development of a healthy personality. And as people age, they, in many cases, tend to develop empathy, learn to care about others. It's a very long and slow process, but we find that these disorders become less intense, and sometimes people can grow out of them. Just look at when you see in the newspaper somebody's been arrested for a crime. It's rarely a 60 or 70-year-old because less of them are antisocial. They've kind of outgrown it. Okay. That's why we see young people often doing that, because they've got immature personality development. Here's one I really like. I love this slide. So this is a slide that talks about happiness. Down here, we've got age. And on the y-axis is your level of self-reported happiness. Okay. And so we've got, a lot of different lines here. They're all basically telling the same story. This is what we call a U-shaped curve. And so what is this telling us about happiness? We get happier as we get older. And so that, people up here, 60s, 70s, 80s, this is one of the happiest times of our lives. Would you agree? Yeah, I think right now I'm in my 60s and I don't think I've ever been happier. Okay. That's a good one. You know, I think it's actually just a change. Well, I think we have, you know, if you're financially comfortable, right? We've got fewer responsibilities. We don't have, you know, young children or children we're responsible for anymore. We have more free time if we've retired. So that's more time to spend with our families, and we can finally do things that maybe we've put off for a long time, pursuing things. And I do think that there's more to it than that. I think there are some changes that occur that just biologically that allow us to be happier. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But, you know, young people think, oh, I don't want to be 60. I don't want to, no, it's good. It's good. And we all know that, but it's something that I think the community at large doesn't realize until they get there, but we can revel in this. We're actually feeling pretty good right now. Life's not bad. Yeah.
I can't help but notice on the left-hand side of the chart, when kids graduate from college, got to go to work, it's a precipitous drop.
Yeah. So before they go to college, they're a little bit like us, the retired people over here. But yeah, you know, here's a thing though, too. You know, the trough is here, right in the middle of, like, you know, when people are really, you know, kind of working on their careers and doing that kind of thing. It's not the happy time. It's a really difficult time. And for women, this graph doesn't break it into men and women, but like having a 1-year-old in the home tends to be the lowest in terms of happiness. Yeah. And that's, you know, spread out over a number of years, so you don't see it. But, you know, people think too, oh, a baby, this is the most wonderful time of my life. But it's the lowest levels of depression and anxiety, highest levels of depression and anxiety are when you've got a 1-year-old in the home. So if you didn't find that to be complete joy, that's okay too. You're normal. Okay, now here's the other end of this, depression. So, and this is stark, I think. What we've got down here are the years of the study. And we're going to look at some trends over time right now too. Years of the study, and we've got this dotted line is the 12 to 17-year-old. The next is the 18 to 25. Then we got 26 to 49, and then the bottom line is 50 plus. And I understand that I don't know what people are saying. Okay, so what is this graph telling us? Yes, young people have very high rates of depression. Okay, and with time, these rates are going up, to the point where there's a little bit of a crisis right now. And this predates COVID too. You can't blame it on the pandemic. And it's gotten worse since the pandemic, by the way. But something's going on. I'll talk about that in a minute. But, you know, for us, here's the good news. You know, we have low levels of depression. The lowest levels of depression are among people who are 50 and older. And that's been a historic thing. Yes. What do we know about genetics? Well, genes haven't changed. So we can't blame it on genes. Okay. And depression is a combination of genes and environment. So if a person has the genetic loading for depression, and that means that they're prone to it. And given the right stresses in your life, you'll have an episode of depression. So, you know, the gene pool hasn't changed. So there's something about maybe the way older people have been raised, or maybe our brain chemistry is changing in ways that make us less at risk for depression. But there's something going on that make the elderly people, older generations, and people as they age become less depressed. Let's see, was there anything else? Oh, and here in this study, they asked them each year, they say in the past 12 months, have you had an episode of depression? They go through the symptoms. So this is like each year they ask them. And I'm going to show you another graph that's a little harder to understand, but this one is where in this study, the researchers said, over the course of your life, have you ever been depressed? So now you got to remember, and I think as as you said, okay, maybe there's some memory issues here. And we do always like to remember things a little more rosy than they were. That's called rosy retrospection. It's actually a thing. Okay, so we remember things as being a little, yeah, like that's why you remember, oh, it was wonderful when I had that baby in the home. Yeah. So rosy retrospection. No, it is wonderful too, a mix. Okay, but let's talk about this graph for a minute. So they asked people at one point in time, have you ever experienced depression in your lifetime? And this is like this 0.25, that means 25% of the people said yes here. Okay, so people who are asked, they're 18 to 29, 25% said yes, I've had an episode of depression in my life. And if you look at, the age 30 to 40, it's pretty close. Now you would think that the older people would have the steeper line because they've been alive a lot longer. But what we're finding is, people 60 and above, only about 15% say they've ever had an episode of depression. So there's something happening over time. So yeah. So there's something about society today that's very hard on young people that's causing them to become depressed much more frequently than our generations. Yeah.
Thank you. Have studies of religious faith or all of the media impact the fact that many of the elderly have had hard work in their early years? They've learned to deal with that kind of stress. Are any of those factors being included?
They are. I think
are they showing?
There we go. Yep, they are. They are, all of them. Okay, all of them. Okay, any other? So you said faith, work habits. Yeah, the social media. Yep. Any others you think? Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Yeah. So yeah, you were saying that.
Yeah, when in the times past, if somebody had depression, you didn't talk about it. They had a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times do you hear nervous breakdown? And the bottom line, it was probably depression.
Yes. And that is absolutely correct, which is why this graph alone would not be enough evidence. But if you pull it in with this graph, then I think we see, okay, we got to start believing it. But I think you're right. This probably would be a little higher if people knew more about depression and understood it. And sometimes, like, especially with men, depression can look different than women. With women, depression is the sad, the crying. Sometimes for men, it's irritability and aggression. And that's often not recognized as depression. Yeah.
That's what I was wondering, whether criteria for this question when it was asked, because I think how we view a depression versus an 18 to 29-year-old is different.
Absolutely. And so, it's all self-report. So it's not an actual diagnosis. So that's a problem with the study, but we do know too, that if you look at rates of hospitalization and suicides among young people, those are going up. So there is something there. The degree of it, you can debate about a little bit, but there's something there. Other questions or comments? Can you hear me? Is this going, it's still good? Okay. All right. So reasons, let's see if you've gotten them all. Yeah. One you didn't mention was the effects of gaming on mental health. And I don't know how many of you have seen some young people that just completely isolate themselves playing games, and it's this, it gets, I know, nephews, nieces, grandchildren. Yeah, you see that. And it gives you a kick of adrenaline while you're doing it. But when people are done playing, their depression levels are higher. So depression is correlated with the amount of time people spend gaming. So as you game more, depression goes up. Now, it might be you're depressed, you're gaming. There might be some of that going on too, but there does seem to be, like in studies where they have people game for an hour, their depression scores are higher after that. And you got some people gaming for 10, 12 hours. Okay, terrible for mental health, and then terrible for sleep too, because they'll game through the night. And then lack of sleep can cause depression too. So gaming is a problem. Social media among young people, particularly girls, is a problem. You've probably all heard about that. And it's not so much the fact that they're on social media, it's if they use social media to compare themselves to others, because everybody's got the perfect life on social media. They're all traveling and happy and like this, and they've filtered their pictures so that they look lovely. And people look at that, and there's this, that you've heard of FOMO, fear of missing out. Yeah. And that creates this FOMO. There's even a term for it now. They feel like, oh, I'm missing out. Everybody else is having fun. I'm not. So that is harmful for girls' mental health. And then decrease in religious commitment as well. So those are some of the reasons why we're finding higher rates of depression among young people. Okay, so how to maintain mental health as we age? Some of the same stuff we were just talking about. Surprise, surprise. It's good for you physically. It's good for you emotionally. So exercise increases mood and decreases depression. So when I'm working with a client who's depressed, I'm always trying to get them to move a little bit at a time, because we do know that exercise releases endorphins. Endorphins are the hormones that let you feel pleasure. And one of the symptoms of depression is the lack of ability to feel pleasure. So when you exercise, you're actually releasing these pleasure hormones. Also, exercise is associated with the release of serotonin, and antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications all increase levels of serotonin. So exercise is doing the same thing for you that antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicines do. How much exercise do you need to do to help with mental health? Studies have found about 30 minutes a day, 3 to 5 times a week. And again, we're here talking about something that just raises your heart rate a little bit. It can be walking. It doesn't have to be a lot. So, this exercise is good for cognitive health, and it's good for mental health. Even 15 minutes helps. Okay. And again, it's a building too. So it's hard to, go from 0 to 100. It's hard to go from not exercising to walking 40 minutes. Take it in steps. Be patient. What kind of exercise? Like I said, walking, really any kind of moving. And we don't want to end up having to compare. We don't all have to be like, what's his name? Joe? Yeah. Roy. Thank you. Oh, her memory's better than mine. Yeah, Roy. I would have gotten to it eventually. Yeah. Yeah, we don't all have to be like Roy. Okay, now we're going to talk about another struggle that is associated with age, and that's grief. Because as we age, we lose people we love. Okay, and grief becomes more and more of our lives. So I just wanted to talk about grief a little bit. Grief is a natural response to loss. Grief is not pathological. Grief is something you need to do to incorporate the person you've lost into your life. You need to do grief work. You need to feel the grief. Okay, like I've read this, grief is the form love takes after somebody dies. And the more intense the love, the more intense the grief can be. So, and people think, and I had a friend whose husband died, and she said, I always thought like after a year I would be okay. No, but grief is always with you. It changes, but it never goes away. And so that you have to have realistic expectations about grief. Okay, grief is going to be here. Here's what happens though, as you deal with grief, and here's what should happen with healthy grieving, is that it comes in waves. And that with time, the waves are less intense and they're farther apart. At first, grief is almost constant, but you'll even see at funerals, people will be laughing, and the people closest to the loved one will be laughing, because there you can even see you're in the middle of grief, but you can still experience some positive emotions. That's the difference between grief and depression. When you're depressed, it's a very steady, low state. With grief, you've got these waves that come and go. Gradually, with grief, you should be able to see, like, by the end of a year, a person should be able to see that they might not be there, but they can see that they can still have a happy future. Okay, and there are still things to live for. And they are able to experience more and more happy memories. Early in grief, the memory's all sad. They're usually about the death. Later at the end of the year, there's also happy memories too. There's still the grief, there's still the sadness, but there's the happiness. Okay, that's what a healthy grief process looks like. It evolves over time. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about when we call it disordered grief, that's prolonged grief. And here, and I'm giving you these symptoms just so that you know, like if you know somebody is grieving, you'll know, is this a healthy process of grief, or have we moved into something that they might need some help for? And psychotherapy can help with grief. Okay. So if after a year, you see at least 3 of these symptoms: disrupted identity. So again, like feeling lost, not knowing who they are or what they should be doing. Difficulty engaging in life. So they're still isolating themselves. Disbelief and saying, I can't believe it happened. It shouldn't have happened. Emotional numbness. Avoidance of reminders that the person has died. And that could even be like leaving all the clothes in the closet, leaving everything as it was so that you don't have the reminder that somebody's changed. The feeling that life is meaningless. Intense emotional pain, intense loneliness. So if they have 3 or more of those a year after the death, then the person might be having prolonged grief. And that's when you should say, you should seek some help, or you should say to yourself, I think I need to seek some help. There are some really good specific therapy programs for people who have this prolonged grief. And I would highly recommend that. Like 80% of people who, go through these courses of psychotherapy are vastly improved. Okay. Any questions about grief? Don't want to linger on it too long. We want to move on to better things, but it's, it's one of the struggles that we do with aging. Okay. Now let's look at another strength, personality. Okay. So psychologists, this has always kind of blown my mind a little bit, but psychologists have decided there are 5 basic components of personality, and everybody's individual personality is an arrangement of these 5. High in one, low in the other, medium in the other. Okay, that's what makes personality. So there's agreeableness. We all know what these are, what extroversion. Neuroticism is more like kind of anxiety. Openness to new experiences, and conscientiousness. These are the 5, they're called the big 5. Okay, now, with age, people's personalities shift a little bit, so they're not immutable. So with age, we actually find for more than half of these big 5, we move in the positive direction. Okay, so look at agreeableness. Now that kind of busts a stereotype right there, like the crotchety old person, right? And actually people as they age get more agreeable. Okay. Extroversion, what do you think happens? More extroversion or more introversion? In our society, we kind of call extroversion the positive, as if introversion is a negative, but no, introversion can be good as well. But do you think people become more or less extroverted with age? Nobody wants to go on a limb. Actually, a little bit. We become a little less extroverted, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It could be you're a little more introspective and a little more circumspect. So how about neuroticism? More or less? Less. Yay. Yes. Okay. We become less anxious, and there's a little depression in there too. So that fits with the fact that as we age, we tend to be less depressed. Openness. Oh, well, okay, maybe not. A little bit of decrease in openness to new experiences. All right, so maybe we've tried a lot and we're happy, but a little decrease in that. And then what do you think about conscientiousness? Yeah, we're more. And this slide shows the difference between women and men. I couldn't find one, but yeah. And so that actually increases with age. So mental health, personality, advantage, elderly, right? So how can we increase our emotional well-being as we age? Social engagement. Being socially active and maintaining social connections. Among people who are over 60, social engagement is associated with increased motivation. So being around other people gives you energy to do other things in your life. A greater sense of purpose. Because, with your social engagement, you're helping other people. You're helping your friends, and, somebody's in the hospital, you make them something, you give them something. I mean, that social engagement can often give you that feeling of having purpose. Decreased depression and sadness with social engagement. And sometimes just getting out and being with people really does help one's mood. If you don't recognize that before they do it, it's not going to have fun, I don't want to do it. And then they do it, and yeah, that was good. So you got to encourage people. You got to think about that yourself. If you're feeling down and not up to doing things, just force yourself to get out there. You're going to probably appreciate it. And it decreases anxiety. And people who avoid things because they're anxious, that just makes your anxiety worse. So if somebody's got some social anxiety, the worst thing they can do is avoid social settings. It only makes it worse. So if you're feeling a little anxious about something, you got to get out there and prove to yourself that it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. Okay, so ways to age successfully in summary. Well, these are the big three, right? Exercise, cognitive enrichment, which isn't quite as important as the other two, and social engagement, right? These are good for cognitive skills and good for well-being and mental health. So how do we get started doing these things? And, you all might feel very motivated after this. I'm gonna go do that. And then nothing changes, right? How many times have we done that? Okay, so here are the tips for helping you get, engage, whatever you decide to do. So you may come out of here saying, well, I'm going to increase in cognitive enrichment. I'm going to start painting, or, maybe I'm going to start exercising. So, you got to decide which one of those do you want to change. So, I don't know, what should we talk about? Should we talk about exercise? Okay, so, let's say you're deciding you're going to put a little more exercise. The first thing you have to do is figure out what you would enjoy doing. If you're not going to enjoy it, you're not going to do it. All right. And so it's got to be something you like, and if you think, I don't like, I don't like walking, it's too boring, then find a friend to walk with. Or, maybe listen to an audiobook while you're on a treadmill. Like, oh, you like listening to books. Find something that sounds interesting to you. Okay. Because if it's not, you're not going to enjoy it, you're not going to do it. So put a lot of thought into that. You're also more likely to do something if you do it with somebody. So it's good to get a partner. You're also more likely to do something if you make a public commitment that you're going to do it. So tell all your friends, your children, well, I'm going to do this. Okay. And then say, check up on me. Okay. So then because you have to see it as something you want to do, not a chore. And we often think of exercise as a chore. And it's very important to set reasonable goals. So we don't want to look at Roy, remember the name now. We don't want to look at Roy and say, I've got to run 3 miles and set a world record, or it doesn't count. We can just start very slowly, like that one study where they started people exercising 5 minutes walking, and then they increased it slowly. I think it took a month or two to get up to the 40 minutes. So, go a week for 5 minutes. You're just going to feel better. Even that could make a difference. So set reasonable goals. And then identify barriers to getting started. So, I'll encourage my clients to get started on an exercise program. They'll come in and I'll say, or even like breathing exercises or meditation, all these things that I assigned. And then they come in and they didn't do it. So then I say, well, what are the barriers? What stopped you from doing it? You wanted to do it, but you didn't. So what were the barriers? And I don't know, what are the barriers that you've encountered that have stopped you from embarking on something like this? Yes, inertia. Okay, yeah, it's hard to get up and move. So how can you break down that barrier? Say, okay, then I'd say, what is the time of day where you have the most energy? Okay, and so if it's inertia, it's because you don't have energy. And then I think about what are the things that you like to do that we can think of it as a reward. So people might say, like watching the Today Show. So then we might say, okay, tape the Today Show, exercise in the morning, and when you come back, you can reward yourself by watching the Today Show. Okay, so figure out what the barriers. A lot of times people say, well, I just forgot to do it. All right. And so that means you've got to pick a specific time. You got to put it in your schedule. Or for some things like breathing exercises, a lot of people think anxiety can really benefit from doing something called diaphragmatic breathing. And they say, well, I just forgot to do it. So I say, okay, do it every time you're at the sink, because people are at the sink a lot doing dishes. Okay, so cue it to that. Do it every time you are stopped at a light and you're driving in a car. Okay, so cue it to things that you are going to be encountering throughout the day, or put it in your schedule. So yeah, identify the barriers and then try to work around those barriers. And the other thing is expect bumps in the road, right? So yeah, you're not going to exercise every day. You're not going to do your breathing exercise. It's not going to happen. And that is okay. And if you don't do them for a whole week, that is okay. You can always get back. So be kind to yourself. Certainly like people come in, I didn't do my homework. I feel so bad. It's like, therapy shouldn't make you feel worse. Okay. So I'm not going to make you feel bad for doing that. So if you don't do it, that's okay. We'll work on it. Okay. So just kind of recapping what we've gone through today. So we have challenged these myths about aging. So we now know there are positive changes associated with aging. We're happier, we're less depressed. We're happier, we're less depressed. And we can even maintain our cognitive skills. Negative effects can be slowed, and some can even be reversed. So that concludes this, but I do have about 10 more minutes for questions if people will have any. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you are aware of the iWatch that has the sleep stages and lists the percentage and minutes you're in every stage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And does everything like the breathing. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really helpful for monitoring your sleep. And so you can look and see, are you having these many nighttime awakenings? Another thing that the iWatch is good for too with sleep is that some people can have sleep problems because of disorders like sleep apnea.
Yes.
And those are actual medical issues that can be very dangerous if they're not treated. And so when I do my sleep therapy, I always have people assessed for that first because
it also shows you if you're in AFib.
Oh, okay.
And so you can find out how many minutes. So, I mean, the
really good
information is fabulous.
Yeah. And I know people who have fallen and they've had that watch on and asked, do you need help? Yeah. Call 911. So technology can be good. Yeah.
Are you taking questions from those on virtually?
Yes.
Well, it's more of a comment, if I may. And this gets back to your earlier part before the summary when you're talking about steps to take in terms of identifying things you enjoy doing under just improving your overall lifestyle. What I found for me personally, and I can only speak from my own experience, is that when I retired 5 years ago, I had a very intentional effort to try something completely different than what I do with my career. So I basically started from scratch. And so what I developed is what I call an intentional integrated practice. So I identified a whole host of areas that I thought I might be interested in, didn't try to practice, try to either think of myself as being an expert or not, but things I thought I might be interested in retirement out into the future. And so what I did is I kind of adopted a 21-day approach to these. The old saying that if you do anything for 21 days, it becomes a habit. So I identified about a dozen areas that I wanted to pursue and work them into my daily schedule. A little bit, maybe in some areas, a little bit more than others, trying to find out what that one thing, what that real level of interest might be over time by giving a lot of areas an opportunity to really take hold and maybe move forward. And I found that to be very effective for me because it gave me some things to work on. And when I say integrated, you start going down rabbit holes. If you get interested in the whole area of longevity, for example, and it ties into all the things that you've been mentioning today, well, you read more, and the more you read, the more you go down that rabbit hole. The more HASP classes you take in that particular area, the more things you do, and then it becomes kind of a it really becomes something that it really affects you across the board in so many different areas. So I found that to be very effective for me. I'm not saying I'm good at any of it, but it's a practice.
You know, I love the fact that you brought that up. And I didn't go into this in the talk, but, you know, in my practice, I have a number of, it's women's specialty care, so it's all women, but a number of women who say things like, I've failed at retirement, right? And you got to find something to replace what you did. And I found, like, I consider myself partially retired. I went from working full time to 2 days a week. It's partial retirement. And it took me, I think it took me 2 years to settle down and get a different frame of reference, and to not think each day I remember each day I have to do something meaningful. I did that for a little while. And then it's like, no, it's like, I don't have to do anything meaningful today, but you know, it'd be nice if I did, but it's not like I have to prove to myself that I have a right to exist on this earth. But what a lot of the people I work with and a lot of my friends, once they retire, they're like, they don't know what to do next. And I love the fact that you had a whole list of things and that you're exploring them. And that is like, that's like the best way to manage retirement is to, like I say to some people, like, what did the 11-year-old you like to do that you've never pursued again? And like for me, I've started tumbling rocks, you know, and making jewelry because I loved that as a kid, and then I let it go. And now's the time to kind of come back to the things that you had an interest in, but never really pursued. So I think your approach to retirement is like fantastic and very healthy. And is there something you've settled on that you really enjoy a lot now? Can we get him? Okay. Well, anyway, does anybody else? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have another question from the chat. Let me just hop in. So when you were talking about screens affecting melatonin, does that include cell phones?
Yes. Yes. You had a question?
Yeah. What do you suggest for those of us who find ourselves immersed in a situation that we cannot escape, such as family dysfunction?
Oh. Yeah. Okay. So and that's tough. And I don't know all of this, what's involved, but it's important sometimes to set boundaries between you and certain family members. And it can feel very difficult to have to do that. Because, you know, sometimes like you're worried about rescuing a grandchild or something like that, but it's important to put boundaries. And sometimes to say people like maybe just say, you can't talk to me about this, or there are certain times when I'm going to be inaccessible, but you need to find ways to put some healthy boundaries between yourself and some family members. Well, then you just need to be firm about ways like not answering the phone or saying, you know, this is my private time. But it's all about boundaries to protect yourself. And sometimes being involved with family members doesn't help them too, because they don't learn independence. So it might help you yourself to think of it that way too. Not only are you helping yourself, but you're helping them too by setting up some boundaries and helping them learning to function on their own. And I know there can be some really difficult situations, but in tough, no-win situations. Yeah.
Thank you. This has been great. I have a quick question. I tend to work late at night on my computer, and I know the melatonin thing, but you know, they have these glasses. Are they really that effective? Or
do you find it? Does it help if you put the
not
glasses?
really?
Okay. Then the answer is no. It probably it might help a little bit, but it is also you're engaging your brain late at night too, so that's part of it also.
get it done late, I'm sorry, I get it done late at night,
Yeah.
then I can go to bed supposedly, but I might be thinking about it
Yeah.
for another hour or so.
Yeah, and you know, that's the thing. If you're laying in bed thinking about things you need to do, I tell people get up and make a list. And you've got your list. You have to do the list. Okay. Yeah. It doesn't always work. Yeah. But then make sure to get up early that next morning so that next time you'll be so tired, you'll sleep. You'll go to sleep. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I just wanted to offer something because I've never been an athletic person. So getting into an exercise program was pretty difficult for me. And so I finally signed up at MVP for a personal trainer because I knew if I didn't make it, I was going to still pay for it.
Yeah.
And then
Brilliant.
I also learned that he could watch me, you know, for 10 minutes on warm-ups, or I could go in 10 minutes early and do my warm-ups on my own and then let him, you know, start practicing with me on balance and that kind of thing. So it's just a thought if you're having a hard time getting going. And I just had a terrible time. So that really worked for me.
I love that. So talk about this public commitment. You are paying somebody to be there and you don't want to lose that money. And you're working with a professional too, who will know what's good for you and isn't good for you. And I, by the way, love MVP. I go to MVP because they've got all sorts of classes. So there's something for everybody there at all different levels. Mhm. And it, yeah. But you know, it's got a whole range too. So you don't have to feel like you're at a gym next to all these muscle people, you know. So MVP's got a really nice mix. Yeah.
I was just going to say, going back to the depression with the U shape, don't you think it has to do with free choice? When you're in that stage of family and job, you don't really feel like you have a lot of free time and free choices, not even time, but free choice.
Absolutely.
You're tied into these things. And so that restricts you. And once we're retired, we have that freedom back again of choice. But when we have dysfunctional family members that come back, they suck that freedom away from us again.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are always exceptions to things. Yeah. Yeah. But I do agree. The pressures and the responsibilities are vastly decreased when we get in these later stages of life for most people. And that's good. Okay, well, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. It's been fun.
Herb, that was the best I've ever heard. I've been here for you. I've heard many. You were a really good speaker. I bet that the students loved it.